also live with suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and student activities.
All the countries and research.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we're here now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, in the top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your ideas for guest topics and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV, now proudly in its 30th year. We have a great show lined up for you today with a friend of mine and a guest who's been on in the past over the last few years on Dialogue Houston, none other than Cesar Espinosa, who's the director of FIEL Houston. He'll tell you about that. But we're going to talk about not only the work that his organization does, but we're going to talk about this wonderful dedication that occurred last Saturday of the Joe Campos Torres Plaza here in Houston. And we'll tell you about that case and all that goes with that. But it's really a great time to recognize and to apologize for past atrocities by the Houston Police Department, which they have done to their credit. They've stepped up, they've apologized. Chief Fender has really made an effort to reach out to the family. But we want to talk about the environment going forward that we're in when it comes to crime and policing and other issues related to that. But first of all, let me just stop and welcome Cesar to Dialogue Houston. So great to see you and to have you here, brother.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As always, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to share this wonderful space with you, Larry.
Tell us about the work you do first before we dive into this discussion about Joe Campos.
Well, I'm glad this is a 12-hour show, so I can tell you about other things. But I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds. FIEL Houston started off as a immigrants' rights club at the University of Houston and at Lee High School now 15 years ago. And throughout the years, we've been very keen at keeping in mind what the community needs, what the community wants. And so now we've transitioned in the last year and a half or so to be a civil rights organization, an immigrant-led civil rights organization. And we are the largest immigrant-led civil rights organization in the state of Texas. Now we have 16,000 members in the greater Houston area, and we're expanding to other parts of Texas to continue to fight for working class families, to continue to fight for immigrants, and to continue to fight for justice for underserved communities.
And I have to give you credit over the years as you've grown the organization and the work you've done. You've really been a vital and important part of this community and the work you've done. And I really applaud you for doing that and watching it grow.
Thank you so much, Larry. You've been whether people hear it or not, you've been a vital part of that guidance for me, and I really thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Even the name of the organization, FIDEL means faithful, doesn't it?
Yes, it means faithful in Spanish. So FIEL means faithful in Spanish, and when we talk to community, we say we want to be faithful to them. We want to be faithful to what their needs and wants are, and thankfully, throughout the last 15 years, we've been able to do that.
And what I've enjoyed watching you grow and the way you've worked and the way you've dealt with the issues and the families, it really is about transparency, accountability, and trust. And you have done those things with great hallmarks of the work you've done in the organization. So again, kudos to you, my brother. It's a wonderful thing to watch you grow and develop. So let's turn our attention to an event that you had the privilege of attending last Saturday, and that was the Joe Campos Torres Plaza dedication. Tell us about that. I understand there were over 1,000 people there. The mood of it was such a great way to bring such a great cross section of Houston together. Tell us about the event.
So number one, I've been working with the Torres family now for a number of years. And not because I searched them out, but rather because not only were they advocating for their brother, their uncle, their son, Joe Campos Torres, but they've been a steadfast, almost drumbeat here in Houston for justice for the Latino community. So Janie Torres has been with us, through cases like the case of John Hernandez, now with some of the families that we're representing. She's been there, and we really have become real friends. So I've seen firsthand how much her and her family have suffered, because 45 years to wait for this moment is a very long time, and all the mourning that they have to go through. But at the same time, all that they have done to make sure that at the end of the day, they got some sort of closure to this very bad case and a very dark time in Houston history. The mood on Saturday was unbelievable. Larry, you know that I had to be somewhere else, and I was only planning to be there for 30 minutes at the dedication of the plaza. But the energy was just so great. It was just such a historical moment for Houston that I just couldn't step away. Everybody who has worked on civil rights issues, all the people who should have been there were there. And the interesting thing when you talk about 1,000 people is that, interestingly enough, there was activists, there was politicians, there was community organizations. Everybody wanted to come see this, and everybody wanted to have been waiting such a long time for this to come to fruition. Obviously, it was a very somber moment when the plaque was dedicated, and at the end of the day, we wish we didn't have to be there, but we were happy to be there finally to in a way right this wrong that was done 45 years ago.
And Chief Fenner said it was such a cleansing for the department too, to finally own up and admit what happened, and to really say, look, we cannot ever let something like this happen again in the city. They now teach the cadets about what happened. They tell the stories of what happened, and all that's new within the last year or so. So now to be able to say, look, we are trying to make amends going forward. This kind of incident, and like a lot of other things that have happened, now that we can release the video much quicker, none of these things need and should happen going forward. But yet we understand it's still going to take time for training and retraining and people to change their mindset. But I think what it showed in 1997, that just this complete disregard for human life and for humanity in the way they did what they did, with the callousness and the vehement of hatred and racism at such a height, that we fast forward to 2022, we still see vestiges of that racism, of that discrimination toward Hispanics, Latinos, and African Americans, not only in sometimes encounters with police, but also just in general in society. I think we've come a long way. We can use what happened with Joe Campos Torres as an example of what not should happen. But I think from what you were saying, what others have told me about last Saturday, every person that spoke made a commitment about going forward in the future to ensure, to do whatever they had to do to make sure that this kind of episode in the city never happens again. Tell me about some of those people, the speeches. And
so I think that's the most hope. That's the thing that brings me the most hope, is that everybody that was there said, we see what happened, we acknowledge what happened, and we are going to work. Not just say we hope it doesn't happen again. That's the key thing. They didn't just say we're going to hope it never happens again. They said we're going to work so that it never happens again. And that's a real important part, because we can all hope for a better. We can hope for a better Houston. We can hope for things to change. But when we work towards those changes that we want to see, that's where the change and the key to those movements come into. So everybody that was there, from Congress people were there. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was there. Congresswoman Garcia was there. Adrian Garcia, Commissioner Ellis was there. Everybody was there, and the theme that kept reoccurring was exactly what you just said. Everybody said, we're not going to stop here. What else can we do to make sure that there's more equity in the way people are treated, and to make sure that we're not sitting here 10, 15, 45 years from now dedicating another plaza in this really, in this sense. Not that it wasn't deserving, not that it's made anything less special. It's just, we shouldn't have had to have been there on Saturday to begin with. But now that it happened, what can we do to right those wrongs? And that is I think that's a key takeaway that I hope everybody took that away on Saturday, that not only do we hope that it doesn't happen again, but what are we going to do as individual people to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and that we hold everybody who needs to be held accountable. A big shout out to Chief Finner. I've known Chief Finner now for a number of years. He's been on the streets with us. He's been marching alongside with us. And I think he really hit the nail on the head by saying now is the time when most people want to be polarized, when most people want us to be polarized and want us to not work with the system and things like that. Right now is a great time to say we as a system, as HPD, as such a large organization, can take this time to apologize for this wrong that was done for this family and to work to make things right.
You know, the year after Joe Campos Torres' murder came the Moody Park riots on March 7, 1998. And that was direct response from the frustration and anger still over the killing of Joe Campos. The Moody Park riot, as you know, erupted into a night of truly destruction of property and police cars and people. But it showed, as they wrote on the walls of the buildings that they burned, it was all about their frustration in how not only Joe Campos Torres was treated, but the ongoing treatment of Hispanics in the community neighborhood on the north side and the east end. And so what boiled over from a Cinco de Mayo celebration of a happy day of 5,000, 6,000 people by dusk became a full-fledged riot. But a lot was learned from that riot. And a lot has taken place on how to rebuild a community and develop that trust, because that's the key going forward. It's always about trust and the community and the police department. And you've seen, as you said, Chief Finner has worked hard on that since he has become chief and before he was chief, to help develop that trust in the community. And I think it's beginning to show and pay dividends, is it not? Because you just mentioned you can see some things changing already.
Absolutely. I heard it somewhere, and you may not know you may know where I heard it from, but I heard a great man once say that every relationship is built on mutual trust and respect. And that really sticks with me, Larry, because whether it's with the police, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with a friend, a coworker, a fellow activist, every relationship should be built on mutual trust and respect. And this translates to the relationship that the community has with HPD. If there's respect both ways, and if there's trust both ways, yep, in the way people carry themselves, but then also the responses that HPD has towards people that may need extra additional help or may not have known growing up what respect really is, et cetera, et cetera. If there is an effort to put mutual trust and respect before anything else happens, then things would be a lot different. So that is what we should all be working towards, the mutual trust that the community has towards the police, but also the respect, but then vice versa, the mutual trust that the police has towards the community to resolve and know what the community wants, but then also to respect people's humanity and to respect people's rights, so that at the end of the day, we're not sitting here 45 years from now or the bicentennial of Houston and saying we have another case of police brutality. And I think, even though it sounds very idealistic to say, I think once again, we should all be working towards that so that we can make a better, more equitable Houston.
You know, May 25th, the anniversary of George Floyd's death is coming up fairly soon here, May 25th, 2020. What lessons have we learned as a community from the George Floyd incident? You were very involved in the discussions and the conversations in the aftermath. You were there, and we all marched together here in the city. That we had this wonderful march to City Hall. You were part of that. You served on the mayor's task force on police reform. Where do you see us going now as a community as we approach the anniversary again of George Floyd's death?
Well, I think there's many lessons learned, and some tough lessons that were learned. Number one is that, in today's day and age, everything is going to come out to light. If there were to have been a camera present during the murder of George Floyd, we wouldn't have known about it. But right, the goodness that there was a camera present, because in the past, during Joe Campos Torres, there was no cameras. It was just testimonies from people that had to come up, and maybe things would have moved a lot faster if there had been cameras at that point. Number two, what we've learned is that once again, you have to have those relationships already built so that these events don't occur. Because at the end of the day, we see that it not only affects the local jurisdiction, but this was a really a countrywide movement that started, that sparked from the murder of George Floyd. And lastly, I think it's important. One of the lessons that I learned and that I'm very grateful for is the fact that it did spark conversations. The mayor instituted this task force on police reform, and other cities around the country took this as a learning opportunity to say, hey, something is not right, and we have to do something about it. But I think one of the most now on my personal side, one of the most important things that I saw is that for the first time in a very long time, I saw Latinos say, hey, this is not right. And it doesn't matter that it is a black man or somebody that's not part of our community, quote unquote, in terms of race. And they stepped up, and we saw a lot of, I'm very hopeful in the new generation of younger folks who stepped out and said, this is wrong and we must do something about it. So one of the most inspiring things that I saw when the marches were happening and things like that was the amount of young people who were out there, protesting and carrying themselves and saying enough is enough. And I'm very hopeful for that, because I hope that, when we're long gone, those generations will teach other generations and we will keep going.
Houston prides itself on its diversity and all that goes with that. But you and I both know in many ways we're still a very segregated city. There's really not many opportunities for us to get together unless we create those opportunities for dialogue and discussion. I think the desegregation of Houston going forward and the resegregation of the school district all kind of plays together now that we have a majority minority school district. And I think what we're going to have to see going forward, and I've talked about this along with others, is that we're going to have to create more opportunities for people to get together and have those dialogues of cross sections. And we're going to have to do it in a way that people feel safe, a safe crucible in which to have those conversations, because that's the only future I see for us going forward. Because we really, if you look at the demographics, you look at the housing patterns, you look at the redlining still, all that goes with that, you look at gentrification, we live in very separate silos across this city. And there's a new, Dr. Kleinberg points it out, and he has a new map that shows basically where minorities are and where Anglos are. And we really live in separate conclaves. And so the challenge is how to get those together. Do you see in the next few years a greater opportunity, and perhaps we just have to create them, for those dialogues to happen and for people of good faith to get together? It's not going to happen in housing because we're segregated. It doesn't happen in our churches because we're segregated. There has to be a community effort to create those places and spaces.
So absolutely. And not only am I hopeful that it'll happen, but I will work for those things to happen. We need to have those dialogues, especially in a city where neighborhoods are changing at a drastic pace. One of our chief organizing person here at FIEL, he moved into a neighborhood 20 years ago that was predominantly Black, and now it's almost 50-50. It's almost 50% Latino, 50% Black, etc. So now we're mixing in this beautiful mosaic. But the only way to move forward is not to focus on what makes us different, but to talk about what brings us together and what makes us the same. And coincidentally enough, and I've talked to you in length about this, Larry, I think there is more similarities than we have differences. The problem is that the powers that be, the powers that want us to keep us separated, tell us they're the enemy when the real enemy is some of these unjust systems that exist. So I think number one, we have to have those tough conversations, those conversations we need to have around racism, around anti-Blackness from the Latino community. We need to have these conversations so that we can begin dialogue. And once we get over that tough part, my hope is that the rest is easier when we say, hey, we believe it or not, we have more in common than we do separately. And anecdotally, I've talked to my friends of like, hey, when I was growing up, my parents used to do this, used to do that. And then we all laugh about it because they're like, hey, my parents used to do the same thing. And it was just the fact that we've never had those conversations that keep us where we are today. once again, what I'm hopeful for is when I talk to my little sister is 16 years old, and she says, well, in my school, we have to really think hard about the fact that we are separated by race, because at the end of the day, since they've grown up with each other, it's not a reoccurring theme. So I think generationally, what helps us is that the younger generations have grown up in this beautiful, diverse city that we call Houston, and they've learned to coexist together without there having some of the differences that our generations have had. So that's my biggest hope, that they take on these leadership roles and they start to look at things from the scope. Now, mind you, not ignoring the fact that racism and race issues exist, because that would be one of the biggest mistakes that this generation can make. But at the end of the day, treating people the way they should be treated, with mutual trust and respect. And moving forward, I hope that we can begin to dive into these things, that we can begin to talk about critical race theory in the school where it's mostly needed, so that at the end of the day, we can open our eyes and more people can see that at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and we need to dismantle some of these racist systems.
What issues do you find yourself spending the most time on these days? Is it a criminal justice issue? Is it immigration? Is it a combination of those? Where do you see the real hinge pin issues in Houston that we really have not really spent enough time talking about or trying to figure out solutions to, that keep coming back again and again to bite us?
I think number one is definitely the immigration issue. In Houston, we have such a vibrant immigrant community, but we've almost taken that old school approach of, don't ask, don't tell. Nobody talks about immigration. Nobody really wants to take on what we need to do in order to help a very vulnerable population and a very large population here in Houston. But slowly, there's pockets of windows of organizing opportunity that are opening themselves to that. Number two, I think housing. From the undocumented immigrant who can't find housing, who is being overly charged by their terrible landlords, to folks who are being displaced by COVID, et cetera. Housing is the great equalizer, because if we don't have that in order, if we don't have enough housing for folks, then we're all going to be in trouble. And number three, I think it's the advocacy for a lot of our community members who just feel like they're not heard. Unfortunately, with the rise of crime at the national level, we've seen a rise of crime here in Houston. And a lot of the times when our families are victims of crimes, they feel like their pleas are just falling on deaf ears. So unfortunately, in the last 6 months to a year, we've been having to advocate for more justice for our families, for them to be, for the systems that are in place right now to pay more attention to them, and for there to be real changes, so that we don't have no more tragedies in our communities.
Is the discussion about housing falling on deaf ears, or there's progress being made? Because you're so right. Affordable housing is the issue we've had in Houston that we've been needing for years, and low-income housing, and housing that allows, as you said, the worker, whether it's the immigrant worker or the minimum wage worker, to be able to have a place to live in the city and work, because they want to work, they're desirous to work. But when they can't find housing and it eats up a big part of their income, and now with inflation and gas prices going up, even the little gains they may have made in salary increase, particularly on minimum wage, is being eaten up by gas prices and food prices going up. We really talk about the need to do that for those individuals, at least the loss of our society, and we make little incremental steps. But you and I both know the city and Houston itself has a great track record of doing things and committed to things they really want to see happen. The will and the wanting to change it is here. I think the necessary funding is here. And I know we talk a lot about this, and a lot of housing groups all across the city are meeting, from discussion about affordable housing to redlining to gentrification. But the bar and the needle seems to be moving so slowly. Have you been meeting with groups lately that really are taking action, not just hoping and praying that things are going to change, as you said, but taking really action steps to make things a difference?
Well, absolutely. We have been running into a lot of groups who are a lot more progressive and who are really thinking outside of the box in order of how we are going to move the political needle. But really importantly is the education part to our community. Because one of the things that we've noticed is that it in large part, it is the fact that there is no affordable housing here in Houston, but on second tier, there's just a sector of the community that doesn't know that exists, or that may be too prideful to even look at those things. So part of our job is a huge education piece on talking to folks, on walking them through these really difficult processes at times to get affordable housing. And then especially under COVID, if they were going to lose housing or things like that, then we were guiding them through different processes, applying for the help that the county and that the federal government were offering so they could stay in their homes. So that is a huge issue that we all have to work on. We see this in the immigrant community all the time. And the sad part is that whatever affects the community at large affects the immigrant community twofold because of lack of documentation or just fear of asking for any type of help. And so once again, what makes us hopeful is that there's new, more progressive organizations who are working, thinking outside of the box, taking direct action at some of these bad actors to make sure that we have a more equitable housing situation here in Houston.
And the state of Texas, of course, doesn't do a lot to help some of those discussions and the way we treat the issues of immigration and housing. And now our governor wants to bus people coming across the border to D.C.
Voluntarily. Voluntarily.
Yeah, and park them, I guess, on the lawn of the White House. I don't know what he plans to do with them once they bus to D.C. We got about a minute left, so give us your closing thoughts and reflections on what's the next number one thing in Houston we have to do as a community.
Number one, I think we want to encourage more youth activism here in our city. We want people to step up because now, as I'm getting older, I'm finding the real ideas, the real awesome ideas that excite me are ideas that are coming from younger folks. So I encourage young people to get involved. I started doing this type of work when I was 15. It changed my life. I've been able to help all of you. So I hope that we find newer, younger people to take on this work and to continue and to provide a better future for Houston and in the surrounding area. So that is my hope. I want to encourage, I always tell young people, my wife kills me whenever I tell young people, because I always tell people, if you want to run for office, if you want to open up a nonprofit, I will give you your first donation. And my wife says, you're taking it too far, but honey, we're going to work hard so we can make sure that we fulfill those promises.
Cesar, I can't thank you enough for being with us. It's wonderful to watch you do your work and watch you grow and develop. And I agree with you, young people. As I'm aging out, as they say, I'm all for the young people taking the lead and following the steps and doing what needs to be done. Let me close with this thought on the historical confirmation of Judge Jackson as to the Supreme Court with this quote: "To be born into a world that does not see you, that does not believe in your potential, that does not give you a path for opportunity or a clear path for education, and despite this, to be able to see beyond the world you're in, to imagine that something can be different, that is the job of a prophet. It is a rare prophet who not only imagines a new world, but also makes that world a reality in his or her lifetime." That's what we're all called to do. We're called to be prophets. We're called to make sure that we take these words and turn them into action, that we empower other people to take movement and to take action, that we establish trust and relationships with other people so we can work collaboratively together going forward. That's our calling, to be the servant leaders that we talk about, that we need. We are that person, and we need to just step up to the plate, and we need to get ready to do the service we need. And ending with the wonderful quote from Leonard Cohen: "After a deeper searching of the heart, we all rise now to play a greater part." We have to play that greater part. It behooves us to be that person. Until next week, we have to get out of here. So let me just say, as always, stay safe, be well, and until we come together again, peace, power, and love.